Okay, good afternoon from Austin, Texas. On behalf of the NMC, I am delighted to welcome you to the NMC Beyond the Horizon, EdTech and the Evolving Roles of Educators. I'm your host today, Alex Freeman. I am the Senior Director of Membership and Special Projects at the NMC, and I'm joined by some NMC staffers, Annie Davis, Gordon Jackson, Michelle Cummins, and Amna Mazar. Our topic today was featured in our most recent publication for the Digital Learning Initiative called Scaling Solutions to Higher Education's Biggest Challenges, an NMC Horizon Project Strategic Brief. Before we get started on this topic, I want to let you know that recently, back in June at our summer conference, we released a follow-up toolkit to this publication with step-by-step implementation support. The toolkit empowers education leaders to convene scaling solutions workshops just like this on their campus. The toolkit provides resources for groups to do a deep dive on 4 of the 8 challenges featured in our report and understand why action should be a priority for their institution. So within the chat, you'll see a link to that toolkit, and I hope you take a look at that after the program. But now back to this program about our topic today. Advances in educational technology are altering delivery modes of course materials, as well as student interactions with content and their instructors. Adaptive technology platforms and advancements in online learning tools are disrupting traditional learning models. Some faculty perceive these changes as a paradigm shift that diminishes their role in designing the learning experiences. These tools are enabling faculty to undertake deeper roles as mentors, guiding students through active learning exercises. So this is a challenge that we're going to take a deep dive in today with a couple different presenters. And our hashtag for today's event is hashtag DLNchat. DLNchat, that's going to be in our chat right there. So if you want to connect with a larger community of those people revolving around this work, that's a good way to do it. In this 1-hour event, we will begin with 2 higher ed thought leaders sharing insights on their approaches to solving today's challenge. I'll then assign you to breakout rooms. That's why you kind of see yourself in this Brady Bunch matrix. We're going to have the ability to turn on your microphones once we get into breakout sessions, where you'll engage in some deep conversations about this topic with a facilitator. So as a reminder, this is going to be an active learning session today that will require your participation. We don't have all the answers. We don't prescribe all the answers in our reports. We look at different viewpoints of how people are solving it and see where we can find some commonalities to help us solve the challenge. Now on to the presenters and facilitators for today. Our first presenter is Candace Till. She's the founding director of the Open Learning Initiative at Carnegie Mellon University and Stanford University. She's the assistant professor of education in the Graduate School of Education and senior research fellow at the Office of the Vice Provost for Teaching and Learning at Stanford University. Our second presenter is Timothy McKay, Arthur F. Thurnau Professor of Physics, Astronomy, and Education, Faculty Director of the Digital Innovation Greenhouse, Principal Investigator of the eCoach Project, Principal Investigator of the Rebuild Project, coming to us from the University of Michigan. Joining them today in our facilitation rooms are Dawn Zamero, OLI Director of Assessment from Stanford University, Jan Holmeb, Associate Professor, Professional Communication and Rhetoric, and co-director of the Center of Excellence and Vice President of the Faculty Senate at Clemson University, and Amy Holmes Hayes, Lead Innovation Advocate, Digital Innovation Greenhouse, University of Michigan. So without further delay, I want to turn it over to Candace to give us the first of our 2 mini presentations. Take it away, Candace.
Okay, so we're going to be talking about EdTech and the evolving role of faculty. So whenever I'm talking about this topic, I always like to start where I believe we should always start, which is with the learner, because that tells us the challenges that we as faculty and institutions are trying to address by using these new technologies. And one of the big challenges is the diversity of the learner. Not only are we being asked to educate more learners, but a much greater diversity. And I don't just mean ethnic, racial, sexual orientation diversity. I mean diversity with respect to the learner's background knowledge, their relevant skills, and their future goals when they're in our classes. But also diversity in their attributions, how the learners explain and make sense of their learning experiences. So the innovation, which is stimulating this change in faculty role, is called personalized and adaptive instruction. And for those of you who aren't that familiar with that term, usually what that means is a piece of technology that collects data from the student's interaction with the technology and models that data in some way to make a prediction about the student. The data that are collected and modeled are used for pedagogical decision making, either for the system itself, the decisions fed back, the information's fed back into the system, so the system can make a decision such as what kind of problem or material to give the student next, or the information is fed back to a user of the system, like a student or to an instructor, for example, to tell them what the system's prediction is about the student's competency on a particular learning goal. But in any case, these are pedagogical decisions. So this is very exciting, and it seems pretty straightforward, given that these information technologies are revolutionizing other industries. However, the data to collect, the factors to include in the model, how to weigh the factors, the modeling approaches to use, the algorithms we use, these are all parts of the current emerging science of learning. And so in an academic context, I would say that these parts can't be locked up in proprietary systems. They must be transparent, peer reviewable, challengeable. Otherwise, when proprietary providers say, oh, just trust us, our algorithms and systems work, I would argue that's alchemy, not really science. So part of what makes these systems work are these approaches to knowledge modeling. And those graphics probably don't make sense. I won't go into a lot of detail about what they mean, but just simply to remind you that the algorithms and these systems are not neutral. A lot of people think, oh, since a computer is making the prediction, it must be objective, it must be neutral. But all systems are going to be biased. And I don't mean that in a negative way. I just mean that the systems are going to reflect the values of the designer, or if they're using a pure data-driven modeling approach, it's going to reflect the data, the behaviors of the individuals whose data were collected to make the model. So given that we know that instructional methods can be differentially effective for different subgroups of our population in different contexts, it's problematic if these models are being built and developed based on unrepresentative populations in narrow contexts. So what we need is a different approach to developing these systems. We need a diversity of perspectives involved in designing the educational technology that's generating the models, and we need a diversity of students in a diversity of contexts from whom we are collecting this data to build the models. So the science that I'm talking about, I'm just going to go through this really quickly. Part of what's also driving this is changes and advances in our fundamental understanding of learning. Multiple changes in neuroscience, multiple changes in cognitive science. So we can take complex cognitive tasks, unpack those things, and create systems with targeted feedback and hints for the learners. We can use social psychological science, thinking about the learner's mindset and how well their beliefs about their own intelligence or intelligence in general supports or inhibits their learning. And also social psychological interventions like the stereotype threat that a learner might experience or their sense of social belonging or not. There's also, most importantly, or very importantly, the computer and data science, where we use the theory that we're discovering, but also using these new statistical and data-driven models to build these explanatory and predictive models. So this gets us to the evolving role of faculty. And there are challenges for the researchers, for the learning researchers as faculty. There's huge underinvestment in the science of learning. There's redundancy of resource creation. Every researcher is creating their own application to try and test the particular theory, and there's not a lot of infrastructure to support interdisciplinary research. And there's challenges for the educator. Often the research results are not easily accessible to practitioners, or even when the results are available, the theories or models are not sufficiently robust to account for the complexity of the educator's context. So an educator might try some principle they've heard, and it doesn't actually work to support their students. So this speaks to a lack of influence that educators have on both the science of learning research and on the EdTech development. So what we're proposing, or what we're enacting, is a different approach, which is a learning engineering approach, which involves both researchers and practitioners to both translate the learning science into practice, but also to have the practice inform the research. So in the Open Learning Initiative, both at Carnegie Mellon and at Stanford, we use a collaborative research and development process where we have the learning scientists, the instructional technologists, learners, the machine learning folks that are making the algorithms, the domain experts, the software developers, and then folks that are thinking of the user experience and universal design for learning, all collaborating on co-creating the courseware that we're using to support our instruction, as well as interpreting the data that is generated. And so I will always start and end with the learner, because all of this is to support us, faculty and institutions, to better meet the needs of individual learners.
Excellent. Thank you, Candace. A nice way to kick off the program. Now I want to give an opportunity to get Tim set up for his program, his presentation.
Good. All right. So Candace's talk is a perfect kind of introduction for what I want to talk about. The vision of focusing on individual learners and using technology as a way of personalizing the experience, even when we teach large numbers of students, is the central focus for what I want to talk about today. I want to begin, though, by taking into account the fact that there are two different ways that we educate at scale on a campus like the University of Michigan's. One way to educate at scale is to create many, many small classes taught by many, many faculty members. So most of the courses on our campus, more than 95% of them, are small, changeable, idiosyncratic courses, often taught in subjects that are very close to the faculty members' research. And in those courses, personalization is done in a very traditional way. An expert instructor working with expertise in the subject that they're teaching is working almost individually with students. That's a great way to personalize. And it's a good way to do it at scale, but it's, of course, very expensive because you have to hire an enormous number of faculty members to do it. So on our campus, as on most campuses around the country, there are a few courses, a very small fraction, really less than 2% of them here on our campus, that are different from that. They're foundational courses. They're large and stable classes that in some ways provide a really ideal environment for doing careful educational research and development. A course where we have a lot of students taking the class every semester in an environment that we control really well. As I've begun to think about this array of different ways that we educate on our campus, I've come to recognize what happened to the learning management system 15 years ago. People built learning management systems wanting to accomplish a lot of the goals that we have for education technology today. But they decided it should be present in every classroom. And this caused the LMS to sink to the lowest common denominator and to become something that's mostly a set of file systems for exchanging information among students and teachers. There are very special problems that are present when we truly educate at scale in these really large foundational classes, which make them an excellent environment for both developing these kinds of tools and for really changing the experience of students. So here at Michigan, we've put a really strong focus on these foundational courses, building tools that aim to personalize education at scale in those kinds of classes. Okay? If we're going to personalize at scale like this, just as Candace described, the first task is for us to learn to know and be able to attend to every individual student in all the relevant ways, even when we teach thousands of them. And this is obviously the place where information technology enters this problem. We need to be able to gather and attend to all of that information in real time. It's not enough just to have the information and be able to analyze it. We also have to be able to act at scale. So we need ways to be able to adapt our interaction with every student in response to all the relevant details, again, even when we're teaching thousands of people. And accomplishing these two goals has required us to think about building a platform for personalizing at scale. And that's what we've been doing here at Michigan over the last 4 or 5 years. Okay. Teaching at scale, creating really effective large foundational courses is not a technical problem. It's also not a social problem. It's a kind of classic example of a socio-technical problem. It has both sides intimately mated. And so if we're going to challenge this, if we're going to overcome this challenge, we have to solve both sides of that problem. And we've been wrestling with that here for quite a while. So let me talk first about the technical framework. In order to create a really strong technical framework for personalization at scale, we have built something here at Michigan called the Digital Innovation Greenhouse. And DIG is a team of software developers, user experience designers, behavioral scientists who all work with faculty members in the context of their own instruction to generate tools which will allow them to accomplish the goals that they have. Many of the tools that we've created are around this theme of personalization at scale. One of them sits at the core of this. It's something called eCoach, and it is a computer-tailored communication system that is designed to provide personalized feedback, encouragement, and advice, and even to deliver interventions to tens of thousands of students. It aggregates all the data that come from many other tools that we have and allows us then to use that data to make decisions about what we would like to say to such a student if they sat in front of us, and then deliver computer-tailored communication to them to do it. So DIG has given us a technical framework for personalization at scale. But it's not enough just to have the technical framework. We also need to change the approach that instructors take to the work they do in the classroom. And the second part of our challenge is changing the social framework for the way we approach teaching large foundational courses. It has been traditional for many years on our campus to treat a really large foundational course almost as if it was the same as any other class. You assign a faculty member to teach it, that faculty member goes in, they teach it however they want to, without examining really whether the methods that they use work, without interacting with the rest of the people who might be in their department, and then someone else comes in and changes it again the next term. So it's treated like a normal class, and they really aren't. What we're doing now here at Michigan is working with our Center for Research and Learning and Teaching to launch a foundational course initiative which promotes this collaborative course design approach to the development and delivery of courses like this, especially these big foundational ones. That includes a set of people that are drawn from the discipline, from the department, faculty members, but also graduate students and undergraduates and disciplinary postdocs. These are the people who bring disciplinary expertise to the teaching, but also education professionals, instructional designers, people who can bring the very best technology to the table, people who think really hard about how best to assess the support we're providing students. And then some people whose sole focus is on making sure we're providing all of the various kinds of students who are present in the class with the opportunities they need to succeed. So this creates a social environment around classes where one expects to do experiments. One expects to examine the results in a scientific way so that these courses can be developed and designed and delivered in a modern, optimized way. Okay? So we're trying to put these things together to create what I would call a learning higher education system, a system in which every time you engage in practice, every time you're teaching people, you have the opportunity to learn from that experience and inform research. And at the same time, every time you do research and learn something new, that has the opportunity to feed forward into practice. A very tight cycle of research, feeding practice, feeding research, feeding practice. So the two elements of the socio-technical solution I described, the Digital Innovation Greenhouse and the Foundational Course Initiative, create the environment that enables the practice side of this. And we are layering on top of this a kind of translational education research idea, which allows researchers to enter this environment and bring what they can to answering the questions that come from practice or providing ideas that should inform practice in this kind of tight bench to bedside kind of cycle. So that's the kind of framework we're building here, as I said, with a focus first on the large foundational courses which we teach. Those courses play a very big role in student lives, and so they're also the ones that have been taught in the most kind of industrialized ways in the past that really need this kind of personalization more than anything. Okay, so my goal is to build a kind of 21st century system for education where teaching at scale takes advantage of these unprecedented opportunities for personalization. We have recognized that this is a big socio-technical challenge, and we're working to address both sides of that challenge here at the University of Michigan. Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Tim and Candace, for your quick mini presentations to get the topic moving. We have maybe just a moment to answer a question from the audience that I see here in the chat. Here, this is Carolyn Crawford. I'm merely curious, from a transparency viewpoint, why wouldn't the students be able to decide how their data is to be accessed, implemented, or at least inform the student that their data is being accessed, analyzed? Candace, my apologies for misspelling your name in the original post.
So I would say that, of course, students should expect to know how and when and in what ways data about them are being used. In fact, we're trying really hard to create a different kind of environment on campus where when students join our campus community, we make it very clear to them that lots of data is being gathered about all the activities that they engage with around the teaching and learning part of the campus, and that we're going to use that data to try and improve teaching and learning. The campus environment, the teaching and learning environment in particular, has a lot of that kind of openness. After all, students have always revealed many things about themselves to us as instructors in a kind of community of trust that has them wanting us to use what we know about them to improve their education. So of course we want to work to be very transparent about exactly what kinds of things we're doing, but this is an environment where that community of trust is something that we can call on. And I think that it is relatively easy for students to accept that we should be able to use the kind of information we're talking about.
Yeah, and I will say in the Open Learning Initiative, the courseware that we develop and the data systems that we develop are used not only at Stanford and at Carnegie Mellon where they were developed, but we collaboratively create these courseware with faculty from multiple institutions across the country. And the courseware, in fact, are used in hundreds of classrooms to support hybrid teaching and learning. But we're collecting all the data from all of the students in all of those courseware in each class to give the data, to model the data and give the faculty member a prediction about the learner's knowledge state so they can use that information to figure out how they're going to use their in-class time. We also collect the data to give back to these collaborative course design teams so that we can continuously improve the courseware that's being used by everyone. And then we also collect the data for research purposes. As I said, each of the interventions is based on current research in learning, and we're often testing different interventions in the science. So every student, when they create an account in the OLI courseware, the first thing they see is an institutional review board, an IRB approved consent form, saying that this is a big research project, and we tell them how we're going to protect the privacy and their data. But they have an option at the very beginning to say, yes, I want my data collected for research purposes, or no, I do not. And the only difference in the learner's experience between having their data collected for research and not is whether that data collector for research is turned on or not. The user's experience in every other way is completely identical, irrespective of whether they choose to participate in the research or not. Also, at any point in the time, they're always informed of their current status as a research participant. So at any point in their learning, they can decide, I don't want to be a research subject anymore, and click on that and change their acceptance. Again, the only difference that will make is whether or not their data is collected. So we take student privacy and data security extremely seriously.
Thank you, Candace. And Tim, now I'm going to take a moment to break you into breakout sessions. You're going to be working with the facilitator, having a discussion, and then we're going to come back into this plenary space to get a report out of what some of the themes were in the different breakout sessions. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open those rooms, and it'll invite you to join that room. So please join that room. Once you get in, you're free to turn on your camera and be able to speak using your microphone. So it's going to be our active learning part. So let me go ahead and get that set up. Okay, so this is the tough part of my job, is to pull you out of these awesome conversations to come back together. But I'm really happy that we could scale this, to use our term, scale this program to reach so many of you. So give just a moment for everyone to get back into the room. And then I'm going to go through each of the rooms and have the facilitators either choose somebody to report out or report out themselves on kind of what are some of the topics that you covered in your session. So I'm going to turn it over to room number 1, which was Candace. Candace, do you want to talk, or do you have somebody that's going to report back on what you guys talked about in your room?
Well, we didn't actually appoint anyone. We jumped right in and we're talking.
Okay.
So I'll do, and we had Anne taking notes. So I'll do my best to interpret what Anne wrote.
Okay,
So how much time do you want for a report out?
2 minutes for each room. Mm-hmm.
2 minutes for each room. Okay, great. So we didn't get to any of our predefined questions because people actively had questions. And the first question came from the discussion really centered around resistance from faculty. How do you introduce these technologies and what kinds of resistance do faculty experience? And then what are some strategies for addressing or attending to, not overcoming, but attending to the concerns that are expressed in their resistance? And there are sort of 2 main areas of what folks were hearing as resistance from faculty. One was this feeling of, I've been teaching for 20 years. It's working just fine. Why do I need to do something? There's all this stuff that you're telling me to do differently. It's not really helping my students. Why do I need to do something differently? And so we talked about some strategies around that. One of them is, essentially engaging the faculty from their research perspective around, so we're not questioning that what you've been doing in your small classrooms for a fairly homogeneous group of students has worked really well, but we're in a new context now where we're being asked to, educate this larger number of students, as Tim was talking about, or a greater diversity of students, and that these technologies are really intended to support the teaching and learning process, but that it's still active research, how to design and develop these technologies in a way that meets those goals. So engaging the faculty, not coming out with the communication of, you don't know what you're doing, so you need to do this differently, and rather engage them as collaborators in the world is changing. And there are these technologies that need to be developed and used to essentially reimagine how we can better support our learners and engage them in co-creating and analyzing and evaluating what's working and what's not working. Someone else said that they put out calls for faculty to participate, and really don't try and convince faculty who aren't interested, but really start with the sort of coalition of the willing. And as those faculty start to engage, then they communicate with their colleagues, and that's really how you build the ongoing support. And then there was a question about incentives. Do people use incentives? And there were a variety of responses to that some faculty, some institutions do provide small fundings or grants for faculty to innovate or contribute or redesign or give them release time. And that seems to be both an indication from the institution that they value this, as well as giving the faculty the bandwidth that they need. Also more and more having support for faculty in the sense of EdTech specialists or people that can, so the faculty member doesn't have to figure it all out themselves, but someone who can really support them to try innovations and get feedback.
Okay, great. Next,
I hope I reported that. Oh, there was one more question about the protecting the student data, and also a concern about if we're collecting data and creating these systems, isn't that kind of the corporatization of higher education? And that gave me an opportunity to be on my soapbox about that's exactly not the direction I'm advocating we go. I'm advocating that rather than outsourcing our core business process, since these technologies are a core part of our business process, instead of outsourcing them to the commercial providers, that we take a leadership role in collaborating across institutions and within institutions to co-create these environments and collect and analyze the data in an academic way.
Okay, great. 2 minutes for you, Tim.
Okay, so we talked about a variety of different topics, all related to using technology to support learning and to personalize learning. One question was raised about ways in which technology can be used to create intergenerational learning. So we had some conversation about the way Stanford is reaching a variety of audiences with MOOCs, and and continuing studies and like that. And some of the models we've used here at Michigan, where students are actually using an educational experience to produce material that would teach an external audience. So we've had students now have an on-campus class take place which produces a MOOC for the world. So it gives them an authentic audience. We talked a bit about open education resources kind of in general, not just these tools, but other kinds of open education resources. And noted that it feels like there's a transition going on in that world. The University of Maryland University College, the online branch of the University of Maryland, has gone completely open education resources. No students buy any textbooks in that 80,000 student university anymore. It's quite a remarkable fact that they were able to do that. Okay. And then we talked a good bit at the end about development teams and the model of having a team of people working on developing in an iterative way a course, a team that includes both disciplinary experts, faculty members, graduate students, postdocs, undergrads from the discipline, and education specialists in instructional design, technology, assessment, and so on. Putting that team together, how to make those teams work, how to keep them on schedule, all of those kinds of questions were things we discussed.
All right, thank you, Tim. Now on to Jan.
Okay, so like group one, we talked about the challenges of getting faculty engaged with some of these new initiatives. And part of the problem here seems to be, as I pointed to, also the credentialing system that is set up for tenure and promotion that doesn't always incentivize this type of innovation. It really is focused on rewarding doing what the profession has deemed tenurable activities, such as publishing articles, writing books, doing the kind of traditional work. And I believe for the tenure track group of people, we're going to need to see changes within the tenure and promotion requirements within the various departments before those folks are going to be really moved to embrace on a larger scale the new technologies. I'm saying not everybody's, of course, a dinosaur in that way, but a lot of folks are fairly cynical about what they need to do in order to get tenure. So as we also talked about, the idea that you target the coalition of the willing was mentioned here, and I think that is one way that we need to actually build the support, and that group will consist surprisingly of a lot of graduate students who PhD students and master students who have a strong motivation to innovate and differentiate themselves on the job market. And also contingent faculty who do a lot of teaching, a lot of heavy lifting for very little money, unfortunately, in a lot of places. And I really applaud their work, but they have also this, because they don't have job security, there is a stronger need to be, I guess, cutting edge for a lot of people, and that you get reappointed year by year. And I want to just kick that back to Maureen because she had some thoughts on that too. So Maureen, would you just summarize up what I didn't mention there?
Was it the point about, we talked about how the academic workforce has changed so significantly, even though the number of tenured professors might not be falling, given all the additional adjuncts and part-timers, their proportion has certainly decreased dramatically. And that presents its own set of challenges for having that sort of teaching population adopt the kind of innovations that that we've been discussing. And I also brought up Candace's wonderful paper on the learning engineer. And Candace, you can speak to this far better than me about how the goal is to have someone in a position that is unique, perhaps not to the group here so much, but I think certainly in the larger picture it is, who can bridge the gap between all the research that Candace was describing, the cognitive sciences and the learning sciences advances, to bridge that to what happens in the classroom, to the teaching. So, Candace, if that's okay.
Okay. Thank you. We need to move on. We're at the top of the hour. So, Amy, give us a quick report out of what topics you talked about in your session, please.
Absolutely, Alex. So our discussion focused on a few themes. So one is about how to roll out technology to faculty, understanding that institutional differences do matter and that institution types have different levels of resources. We also talked a lot about how to get buy-in from faculty, so how you can get them to trust you and understand that you're not trying to fundamentally change the way that they teach, especially if they perceive that that teaching is going well. We talked about putting power in the hands of faculty by engaging them in the process early on of either choosing or using EdTech, so they become champions for those tools. We talked about how the resources that you use to incentivize EdTech cannot just be money. So the idea that if you give faculty money, you might create a product or implement a product that cannot be scaled or that doesn't last when you look at the larger institutional context. And finally, we talked a little bit about why student input matters. So how to ensure that learners and students are at the table when decisions are being made about what kinds of resources to purchase or to build, and then how to ensure that your user base continues to grow.
Thank you, Amy. And last but not least is Dawn. What did you talk about in your group, Dawn?
Hi, Alex. I have 3 succinct points that I'll cover because, like I said, I know we're at the top of the hour. So we actually talked about once faculty members decide to adopt a technology, how to train them in the best effective use of implementing that technology. And so training, top-down training has not been found to be effective, whether it's from Centers for Teaching and Learning or instructional designers. And so we had a discussion around the need for peer-to-peer training where faculty members sort of share lessons learned in addition to what centralized resources can provide on a campus. But then we also discussed that instructional designers themselves can be more familiar with the technology, but not how to teach or teach with that technology. So we may need to consider ways in which to enhance some of our training for our instructional designers and those providing the training to faculty members. And then lastly, we talked about when faculty members are adopting new technologies, they often focus on this seems like a cool new tool to adopt, but we really need to back them up and have conversations about why they want to use the technology from a backward design perspective. What are their learning objectives? And then how will that technology help meet those objectives?
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you all. And to wrap up today's program, I want to thank our facilitators and presenters on behalf of the NMC for taking time to lead today's discussion. Participants, if you're not an NMC member, consider becoming one today. I've put a link in the chat. It's learn more about becoming a member of the NMC and becoming one of these voices that we reach out to for these programs. And speaking of programs, last but not least, everyone save the date for, let's see, for August 17th. August 17th is going to be our next online program where we're going to focus on learners as creators. It's the release of our second digital literacy brief. So if digital literacy is important to you, go to that link, LASC. It's go.nmc.org/LASC to join that event. So thank you for your time today. And with that, I want to bid you all a nice Wednesday.